Battalion. I lobbed into Tobruk and I was there for 7.5 months.
What rank were you in Tobruk?
Private.
Okay.
There you go.
Tom Anderson, the 2nd 24th Battalion, Infantry. Arrived in Tobruk at the start of the siege, April 41, and was there until the 1st of May 41.
That's good enough. We'll go into the rest of that. That's just a bit of a reference. All right, so when you're ready, just tell us how you came to join the army.
Well, I was working at Coles as a trainee storeman. I was about 16, just 17, and all the soldiers were starting to parade around, so I thought I'd join. I ran away and joined the army, and I didn't know the difference between the militia and the AIF. And I finished up in the militia, out on the Hume Weir, marching up and down with a rifle and bayonet, as they suspected that there was a German submarine in the Weir and it was going to blow the wall up. A bus driver spotted me and reported me to the police, and they came out and got me and discharged me from the army. I had to walk into town about 5 miles, and then I lay about home. I wouldn't do anything, and my father said to my mother, take him to Melbourne and let him join the army. Dad had lost his leg in France and he wasn't very happy about it, but he could see there was no alternative, and so they signed my papers and I joined up at the Melbourne Town Hall. And I was away for about 5 years, 5.5 years, and I was very lucky. I escaped a couple of times. I was blown up once, I was shot once, and all in all I nearly starved. No water, no food, plenty of fleas and flies. But I had terrific mates, terrific fellows I was with. We had good officers, and we were very fit when we got in there. We did a lot of training in Palestine, and we improvised. Everything we did was improvisation in Tobruk. And people tell you that Italians were cowards. I found there were a lot of Italians who weren't cowards. I don't know, the fellows that said that weren't up there, I don't think, for very long. But they weren't quite in the same category as the Germans, but they knew what they were doing, and there were some very, very fine Italian soldiers there. But, I've had some wonderful friendships out of it. We're still in an association, the Rats of Tobruk, and we meet and talk to each other, and we've remained friends all through these years.
All right, so now, Tom, can you tell me how you came to join the army back in those days?
Well, I'd been debating with myself for quite some months prior to joining up, and suddenly one night I was home with my mother and 2 other brothers, one older, one younger, and a sister, and I just said, Mum, I'm going up to enlist. So with that, the younger stepbrother, he also decided he was going to enlist, but unfortunately he was 2 months underage. However, we both went up and to the Geelong drill hall, and we passed everything there, medically. And a few days later they sent us up to Melbourne Royal Park, where the final enlistment was, and there again we passed everything. And from there on, we were only there a few days, to Wangaratta a few days after that, and we passed with flying colours again. From Wangaratta became our hometown really, as far as our battalion was concerned. And we were there for several months under training, from there to Bowen-Gilla, and the big new training camp up there. There for some time, like weeks actually, and from there down to Port Melbourne on our favourite ship, and away we went.
And yes, tell me about the ship that you came out on, Charlie.
Went away on?
Yeah, tell me about the ship you came out on.
Strathmore. It was a class ship.
Just started off again. Once again, try not to cut me off just so I can cut myself.
Sorry.
You all right?
Well, we went away on the Strathmore. I had my 18th birthday out opposite Rosebud. The ship pulled up there for the night. Full lights on, of course. The restrictions hadn't applied at that time. The German raider hadn't been sighted at that stage, and we sailed across the bight with full lights on. As I recollect, when we got to Fremantle, we pulled in there, and then the danger signals went out that the Cormorant, the battleship, was out waiting for us to come back out. So we were lucky we had a few days in Fremantle when the local people gave us a terrific time. And it was only a 22,000 tonne of it. To me, who had never even been in a rowing boat, I thought it was a marvellous experience. And we pulled in at Trickamaleer in Ceylon, and had a very happy day there. And we got over to the Suez Canal. We got off at, what's the name of that place, Tom?
Alcantara,
Alcantara, yes.
up on the Bitter Lakes.
And the barbed wire from the First World War was still over the old trenches that were beside that. And we trained there and went to Dimra in Palestine, commenced training. And we were there for 2 or 3 months, and we did it pretty hard. By the time we left there, we were fit and hard and tough and ready for anything.
So you're in Palestine doing your training, and orders came to go up the desert. Can you take me from there?
Yes, well, we moved from Palestine and up to, by road, I believe, down to, at least train to Alcantara. We crossed the Suez Canal, and by train again up to all the way across Egypt and across the Nile. We didn't get off the train until such time as we got up as far as Mersa Matruh. And Mersa Matruh at that time had already been invaded by the Italian army, which had come through from Libya, which was their colony, and made a mess around there. But fortunately for us, the Italians weren't there then, because our 6th Division had previously dislodged them and sent them all the way back through Libya. And from there on, we were only there overnight, I think. And from there on, we pushed on by road transport all the way through Libya, bypassed Sidi Barani, Badi, Bug, and several other little places, Hellfire Pass, Saloom, and even bypassed Tobruk, and all the way through then up as far as a few other little places on the way, as far as Tolmita Pass at Tobruk, and that was the end of our journey that direction.
Charlie, can you take us through what was the situation now? I mean, why were you sent up to replace the 6th Div?
Well, the 6th Div had captured Cyrenaica, Benghazi, all those places. Became very famous through it. Captured about 200,000 Italian soldiers who were all trained and ill-equipped. But they were pulling out to go to Greece and Crete, and we were to replace them, and we were supposed to just go there and do a bit of training and occupy the place, have a bit of a holiday, as a matter of fact. But when we got up there, and as Tom explained, we had all this long journey right across Palestine and up North Africa, Egypt and North Africa, and we had just dug in on the top of what was Tobruk Pass. Behind us was a nice little village called Barsi, and we were enjoying the sunshine, lovely green trees and green grass and all this sort of thing. Suddenly we saw fires burning, big smoke columns going up behind us and all around the place. Well, the rumours started then, and it turned out the Germans had come around behind us and circled the British Army, and so we had to embus and head for home. So we hurried back across the desert. They called it the Benghazi, what they call it, Tom?
Benghazi Handicap.
No, Benghazi Handicap, yeah, Benghazi, oh, shocking memories of that.
And was it like a handicap, Tom? I mean, tell me what happened.
It was a handicap. Well, everybody was, most people that is, were travelling by transport, but we travelled all day, at very slow pace really, and come the night time we'd debus there and stay on the side of the road. And the roads were just littered with transports loaded, but there's also a hell of a lot of men who didn't have transport at various times, and they were on the hoof. And anyway, after resting there overnight, and in the meantime, while we were resting, those same transports, they'd gone back to reload with other men who didn't have transports. Now they'd take them further on again, and hopefully by morning they'd pick us up again and leapfrog further on again during the day. And this was a common practice of the retreat all the way back as far as Tobruk. If you got lucky, you stayed on the same truck the whole way, but as far as your equipment and gear and things were concerned, oh God, no, you lost a lot of it on the way because you couldn't load it. A lot of times you didn't have time to put it on the trucks. There wasn't room in other times. Eventually we did eventually get to the perimeter of Tobruk, but this took us days and days. And of course every time we stopped, we'd dig a little hole for ourselves. And you couldn't dig very much. It was a matter of inches. We could dig a hole, and the dirt we dug out of it, you'd make a little parapet around your slit trench in the event of our enemy catching up with us or an aircraft raid, just for some sort of protection. And during the whole process, I'm sure our battalion and all other battalions dug up half of Libya before they finally got back to Tobruk.
So it seems as though that you were one step ahead of the enemy at that stage in the Benghazi handicap. Was there any close confrontations during that period?
Yes, one night we found ourselves, our column was alongside a German column. I think from recollection we're going the same direction, truckloads of Germans and truckloads of Australians. But our blokes woke up sooner and we carried on, got out of the road and let them go their way too. So that was one confrontation which we avoided very adroitly through good leadership. But, otherwise, no, we just tore through the desert. We were often rear guard, and as Tom said, we'd dig in here and be in the hole a few hours and up and off again, starving and cold. But it was an exciting adventure. Dust everywhere and speeding trucks through the desert. No lights on them, out in the darkness. It's a wonder we didn't all crash into each other. And if a truck broke down, anything went wrong, they'd just get out and set a light to it and all pile on something else that they get anything coming along they'd get on. But it's quite a hectic experience, and we didn't stop till we got to a place called Gazala where we established a defensive position, and that's the first place we come under gunfire. A few tanks pulled up in the horizon and let us have a few shells, and the Stukas arrived and dive bombed us. We thought we were right in it then, of course. That was only a flea bite to what was going to happen to us afterwards.
Tom, Charlie mentioned excitement. I mean, was that the general feeling amongst the battalion, from your recollection?
Yes, I'd say it was excitement. It wasn't fear at all. Well, in my case anyway, and I don't remember anybody who showed any fear. But the excitement of new adventures seemed to take control of us, and it was all excitement.
Can you explain, Tom, from your point of view, what happened and when it was that you actually got into Tobruk, and tell me about how it was once the siege began?
Well, the day we got within the perimeter of Tobruk, I'm not sure what day it was, but it would have been maybe the day before the actual siege of Tobruk started, or listed as having started. And of course the battalion came through in dribs and drabs, and the various companies also came through in dribs and drabs because they're all in different buses, trucks. Anyway, finally they designated a point for us within the perimeter where the 24th gathered, and we dug holes there. And when we finally found we were full strength, by the next day that would have been, we were there for a couple of days or several days when they setting up the defences of the front line in Tobruk, then our battalion took up the position along El Shalal Wadi, El Shalal, which runs from the Mediterranean coast in that area of Tobruk towards the Derna Road. And that's the section that our battalion took at that time.
What was the general feeling, the general conditions that that you can remember in your first few days of Tobruk?
Well, going in there, it was all, to us, all the privates in the army, it was a mess up. So like, give the experts the hand and they'll ruin it all together. We didn't stop and start and stop and start and get out and dig some holes and get in them, get it back in the truck. And finally, of course, the officers were having little gatherings and they had their pasteboards in front of them, drawing maps and everything. And we, as Tom said, we finished up down Del Salor, was it, Tom?
Del Salor.
Wadi, a big, great big.
Yeah, big.
It was a big wadi, a big gully, a great big one. And we stayed there. One of my mates, a little dark fella named, good God, he dressed up in a lot of old Italian army clothes there, and he dressed up in army. They nearly shot him because he looked just like an Italian. Chaka Throw was his name. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, poor old Chaka. Well, we had quite a pretty quiet time, and one of our officers, a chap called John Kelly, took a patrol out and came back with an Italian prisoner. Well, he caused a lot of excitement. I was thinking back over him, poor decrepit-looking bloke, and John had his .45 revolver pointing at him. I think the fellow thought he was going to be blown to eternity, but that was the most exciting thing happened down there. Although we were sent out one night on a water party, there's a tank in the ground back about a mile from when we had to go out with some jerry cans and fill them up. I was with this English fella, an older man, and I saw some movement on the horizon. I said, down. He went down. What's that? I said, there's a bit of movement over there, whispering away, best traditions of secrecy. And he said, do you think it's the enemy? I said, yes. He said, we'll show them something. He said, Charlie, take this section round that way and I'll take mine this way and we'll surround the mongrels. And there was only two of us there. I don't know whether we can... Turned out to be a camel. They tell me there was about 6 camels roaming around there, and after the siege was over they were still going strong, so they must have known something about avoiding enemy fire. And we got our jerry cans of water in the finish, and that was a very successful little safari.
Tell me, Charlie, just backing up to the Benghazi handicap, one thing we didn't mention was the fact that your brother was in the 6th Div.
Yeah, 2nd, 7th Battalion. Yes,
can you tell me that story from scratch?
Yes, well, when we got to Alcantara, was it, Tom?
Alcantara, yeah.
Alcantara. There was a dust storm on. The 6th Divvy was coming the other way and we were going up. And so my brother just found me there somehow or other, and he gave me a piece of fruitcake. He claimed me to go to the 2nd, 7th Battalion. Unfortunately, his claim wasn't successful, or I probably would have finished up dead or taken a prisoner of war with him in Germany. He was captured on Crete. And he told me he was captured by the German heavyweight champion of the world.
Smelling.
Yes, he said, and he was a pleasant fellow, very nice gentleman, a lieutenant. Well, Max Smelling.
Yeah.
Yes, and he said if we'd had ammunition and means of communications, we'd have held Crete easily. But they ran out of ammunition, and they were on the aerodrome shooting paratroopers, and they couldn't get in touch with battalion headquarters about ammunition, and so they kept on landing and finally surrounded them and captured them and took them to Germany. But when he came back, he worked in the public service for a while, and then he went to Korea in the war in Korea. He was away for 2 or 3 years, and that was our little meeting in the desert in North Africa.
Tell me, Tom, was there any sort of advice that because obviously the 6th Div had a good reputation by that stage, and they were seasoned soldiers, I guess you could say. What was their sort of advice to you, or did they give you pass anything on to you that put you in good stead?
No, well, actually, we had little contact with them, but my recollection of the 6th Division was as we were going into the desert, and it would have been after our transports had gone past to the Tobruk area, the transport coming from the opposite direction, my inquiries were that that's the 6th Division going out. And we, in those days, were the 7th Division. And we were to replace the 6th Division, which had been right through the desert from day one and right up as far as Benghazi and a little bit further. And that's the time when we did replace the 6th Division in the desert. They came out, and it would have been completed within a day or two, their evacuation of the Libyan campaign, and they'd have been back into Egypt and Palestine, and shortly after that period is when the Greece campaign came along, and in the military wisdom they decided to send the 6th Division over there, which they did, with the disaster that Charlie has just described. But I have heard that what Charlie mentioned, Max Smelling, I have heard over the years that, or read it even, that he was a notable officer of the German army. But for the uninitiated, Max Smelling, prior to the war years, was world heavyweight champion.
I just want to know what the role of your battalion was over the Easter weekend. So I'm talking about the first few days of the siege. I know you've sort of said your situation, but can I get you to say where you were and what role you played in those first few stages of the siege? Which one would like to start on that one?
Well, we had been moved from the position along Wadi El Shalal, that was from the beach area to the Derna Road. We'd been moved from there, after being down there for a period, into the reserve line. I should say the second line, and we'd been there for several days again when we relieved our 3rd Battalion of our 26th Brigade, the 2nd 48th. Now they'd been up in the front line in the salient area. Now they were being relieved by the 2nd 24th Battalion, and we took over from them as they came out, marched out, so we marched in and took their same positions. That was, well, their big battles that the Germans put on in that period was the 1st of May, the last day of April over the night, and the 1st of May. Well, we would have been up to those positions, I would think from memory now, the 29th day of May, I think from memory, because we'd only been there 36 hours maybe before this big attack arrived on us.
Tell me about Rommel's second attack in the perimeter of Tobruk.
Well, we, the 2nd 24th Battalion, we were back from the front line, and we were told that we'd move up and take over from the 2nd 48th Battalion that afternoon. So we moved in, and we hadn't even established where company headquarters or battalion headquarters when Rommel attacked us. My platoon commander at the time was a chap called John Christie from Numurkah, and we occupied a post called S8. S7 was out on the escarpment. We could clearly see the chaps moving around, but they were far too away. The posts were too far apart for us to lend each other support. It was about 800 yards between posts. We found out after we'd occupied them we had to dig other posts in between all over the place to give us covering fire whenever we moved anywhere. And John Christie said to me, "Charlie, we better go and establish where company headquarters were." So, well, we went up over the escarpment and we found company headquarters in the post along the Acroma Road. And Captain Canty was the company commander, and we were there for a while and suddenly shell fire started landing on us, and there was a lot of movement and a lot of noise out the front. And Captain Candy said to John Christie, he said, John, he said, I think this is going to develop into something nasty. Your place is back with your own platoon. So John said, come on, Charlie, we'll move. So we headed off back to the post. And during the night, there was a terrific battle taking place up in the escarpment, and we were right on the edge of it. And there was a telephone call from company headquarters that they'd run out of ammunition. And so Christie told Arthur Fitzpatrick, corporal in my section, to take 3 or 4 of us and a box of ammunition up to company headquarters. So we went up past the water tower, which is a very formidable feature in Tobruk, and it was very dark, and we could hear the Italians particularly singing out Aqua and all that sort of thing in the dark. And we left 2 fellows, one fellow Bull Smith and another chap at the top of the gully that we'd come up on to keep guard while we were away. So we went on further up the Cromer Road, and Fitzpatrick went to ground with us in a couple of sangers, little rock sangers. And he said, Charlie, you go up and get... The machine gun was firing straight down the road from company headquarters. He said, Charlie, go up and tell them to stop firing that machine gun until we get there with the ammunition. So I took off. I wasn't silly. I wasn't going to walk straight up the road, so I circled it. But I got out there, and there was no time. I was in amongst a whole lot of Italians and German blokes singing out and going on. And I had lost my way, and how I found my way back to Arthur Fitzpatrick, I'll never know. I came back to Arthur, and he said, we better take the ammunition and go back down to our post. When we got back to the top of the gully, old Bull Smith, who was a bit deaf, I heard him say, you halt them and I'll shoot them. So we got a bit of a start then. We got down the gully pretty good. Well, the next morning there was a fog or a mist or something, and we saw these chaps wandering about, went out, and we captured 5 Germans, an officer and a sergeant, a corporal and a private. I think there might have been, that was the 5 of many, and the young fella had a bullet through the mouth, a very brave little bloke. Well, we had him in the post there for 24 hours, I suppose. We had no water much, we shared it with them. And what struck me was they looked as though they'd just come off the parade ground. They looked in apple pie order. Well, by this time we'd started to get a bit shabby. And during the day, S7, we could see our blokes, the Germans were attacking it very fiercely, and we sniped a few of the blokes. We left a couple hanging on the wire out there, but they overcame them in the finish, and we were very heartbroken to see 5 or 6 of them walking away with their hands up. And that was the first day of it, and it continued like that. They attacked us the next day, and they surrounded us, and there was a big tank trap round the post, and there was at least 28 Italians in that tank trap. That's how close they got to us, when the 2nd 23rd Battalion counter-attacked and saved the day for us. Well, we put in another 3 weeks there, and it was nearly a lifetime for me. Very pleased when we finally got relieved, and we went back, and they were told for a spell it would only be half a mile or a mile back, but we were a lot better off back there than where we had been. But that was the first day or 2 of the attack after Rommel came in with his tanks and overcame half our battalion.
Can you take me through that particular battle from your point, where you were and your point of view?
Yes, well, it started off mid-afternoon, more or less. The German decided to soften things up a lot, because the first attack he made on Tobruk turned out to be a failure, because he didn't go in with heavy enough equipment, and he wasn't going to make the same mistake a second time. So on this occasion, the 1st of May attack, he went in with practically everything he had. He still didn't take Tobruk, he took a bit of it. But this attack had started off with an artillery barrage for a start. Would have been late afternoon, early evening. Not happy with that. The dive bombers and Stukas, they played havoc with us for the next half hour or so. They did a fair amount of damage, and in the process some of our men were killed, and our ammunition storage went up with it also. So consequently we were without ammunition, and the problem of getting new ammunition was damn near out of the question because all communications had been blown sky high because they're all on landlines. So after the air attack, the jury was still softening us up with another barrage, which went on for some considerable time. The second barrage, it played just as much havoc as the first barrages did, blew things around a damn sight more, and quite a few others were passed to eternity at this stage, and then it started to get dark. And odd things were going on. The German tanks moved in and their half-tracks moved in, and they started to shoot things up to their own convenience. And we started to retaliate with a .303 rifle against German Tiger 85 tanks, which was, well, you can imagine our problem. So things, although the artillery and the bombing had stopped from dark onwards overnight, the tanks were still out there, although they couldn't see much. A very light from the Germans would go up occasionally and brighten things up, and the tanks would let off a few shells and hit another sanger or weapon pit and do a bit more damage there, or it might even go over your head. But there was nothing at that stage in the dark for the infantry to shoot at because we couldn't see. We did hear voices overnight, yes, but there's no point in us going to find the few voices from our own weapon pits. And this was the sort of the situation all overnight, that we could hear voices, Italian, German, and we'd let a few rounds off here and there in the direction generally, but we didn't do any waste of ammunition really. But later on in the night or early morning, when it got daylight again, the situation looked very, very dismal. All we could see out the front of us was a line of German tanks, and they were all pointing to our weapon pits, not only the one I was in, but all the other positions that were occupied by our men. Anyway, then the German infantry started to come in as the tanks advanced, and the tanks were blasting away, so were the infantry, so were we. Finally, as I say, our ammunition was blown up the night before when we lost our sergeant and another man, and left one enormous hole in the ground right where our ammunition had been, .303 mortar and you name it. And anyway, about this stage, our major came around and he says, "Sorry Tom, it looks like this is the end of us." He said, "We have no choice, it'll only be a slaughter from now on, but we'll have to surrender." So it was up to him, and he did the job of surrendering. He put up a white something on the end of a rifle, and it was all over for us. We down our weapons, the Germans took over, the German tanks came a bit closer, threateningly, and put a few shots over, machine guns, and German infantry came in. Okay, and the major said, "That's it, put your rifles down." So we put our rifles down and we put our hands up. Of course, this white flag was still waving up there, and we stood up, unarmed, and the German troops just came in. "Okay, for you the war is over," was their common expression. For us the war was over, including think from offhand now 2.5 companies of men, more or less, and there were few wounded, and the Germans did look after them. And anyway, they lined us up from that point on, and they took us out of our weapon pits, these concrete weapon pits as we had, and they took us back a few hundred yards to the Acroma Road, which is a track, we call it here. It was only a gravel track through the desert. But anyway, they took us back there and lined us up to march out, and there's a tank behind us and German guards on either side with automatics slung over their shoulders at the ready. And at that stage, unfortunately for us, now had this same thing happened more or less half an hour earlier, it could have saved the situation for us because of our artillery. They opened up, they were right on the dot. And the damage they did enough. And of course we POWs, a couple of hundred of us more or less, lined up there to march out to this Fort Acroma. The only thing we can do to try and protect ourselves was lay down flat on the road, which we did, and there was still a couple of them got wounded. So when that barrage was over, the Jerrys were smart enough to get us on our feet again, and away we went. And so we marched away to Fort Acroma. It's an old fort out there about approximately 8 miles away, which we eventually got to, and we helped our wounded, and I still have a photo in that book of that.
I'll just get you now to continue with that that story on the POW and that situation. Continue.
Well, from the Germans starting to move us off from the where we were lined up on the Acroma Road, they had the column of us, 200 of us. They had the several guards on either side, German guards on either side of this column with their Tommy guns slung over the shoulder at the ready, in case there's a sudden breakout, and it was a possibility. Also behind this column they've got a German 85 Tiger tank coming along. But we're moving along, and I finally worked my way down towards the end of this column. Now we hadn't gone all that far, less than half a mile, when one of our fellows, one of my company men, a fellow by the name of Pop Oram, he did live up here at Victorian, up at Port Punker, up near Bright in Victoria, and he'd been hit during our own artillery barrage on the situation then. And he'd been hit in the head and he was bleeding, and we couldn't do a damn thing with it. Nobody had a field dressing. Anyway, he wasn't feeling all that brilliant. I'm helping Pop along, and I look behind me, and this tank that's already got 3 or 4 men on it. And I thought, oh, well, why not? So I turned around, put up a hand like a traffic policeman to stop this tank. He stopped. I indicated, of course there's a German got his head out of the turret, looking, watching the situation, and anyway I indicated, could we put this wounded fellow up on the tank? They indicated yes, so the tank stopped. He came up right behind us and stopped. So we bunged Pop up onto this tank. And the tank still followed us up. We moved off again. But also on that tank, there would have been another, either 3 or 4 other people. In fact, it could even, it might have even, this photo might have even been taken before I put Pop Oram onto this tank, because this is the photo that I have. We finally got to Fort Acroma, and Pop went off, and there was a medical orderly there, and they dressed his wounds, and a day or two later we went from that Acroma camp, and they moved us over to Derna, which was a bigger prison camp, only a temporary thing, which had previously been Italian barracks. And we encamped in there for, well, I suppose it would have been a month, but I wasn't there for a month. But Pop recovered from his wounds at the time, and he lived to be, well, he didn't live a full life, not to 80 years of age. He might have got to 70 because he's a much older man than everybody else. But he might have lived to be 70. I know I went looking for him once, the first time I went looking for him up here in Victoria. I'd been told that got to the village, the town he lived in. Oh no, sorry, Pop died some years ago. But later on I did find his wife.
So when I ask you another question, you all?
Oh, you're fine.
You rolling there?
I'm rolling now.
Okay. Tom, just tell me, probably a personal question or not, but this is obviously the first time we've spoken around the POW, and no one else has ever covered that or experienced that. Can you describe the feeling amongst the men when they were taking?
It was a great feeling of dejection. That everybody sort of, why? Just dropped their bundle. From everything that had been happening before, we were top of the world, but all of a sudden we're on the bottom of the world. It's an entirely different, depressed feeling. Nobody wanted it. Nobody could do a damn thing about it. And I think it affected quite a few of the men in that way, that they became very, very depressed over the next several years that they were POWs. Most of them were POWs for the best part of 4 years. Some weren't, but a lot of them were. And a lot of them that I learnt later on had little or no interest in wanting to get back into the fighting line by not attempting to escape. They had no escape plans. They didn't think about it. They didn't want to.
Charlie, where were you privy to this when it was going on? Did you know this, or know this was going on where you were, or?
Oh yes, well from where we were, we could see tanks coming along on top of the escarpment with infantry support coming alongside just behind them. But we couldn't see, of course, far in. We couldn't see over to where Tom was because that'd be about 1.5 miles away. But we were aware that there was a major thrust going on, and it was coming on towards evening. And some of us were pretty good rifle shots. We'd take shots at fellas, and other blokes would say, "Don't you draw the crows?" Well, I wasn't worried about the crows, and neither were some of my mates, as long as we could hold them away from the other post, 7. But I'd say that half of Tom's problem where he was taken prisoner, if the post had been closer, where they could have supported each other, there might have been a different result. But they poured in through there during the afternoon, and in the evening, when it was coming on dark, these tanks were about a dozen of them. They ran into a minefield that the Italians had put there, and blew the tracks off a few of them. And it was dark, and there was a bit of confusion, and our reserve company, B Company, they never had a company commander. Bull Mackenzie, the sergeant major, had control of the company, and he led a bayonet charge through the gap in the wire and destroyed the infantry. And the tanks, well, they had these big units that came in, and they'd lift the tanks and drag them away. Well, Bull and his men did a fair bit of damage to some of those while they were there. Well, while they were doing that, the 2nd 15th, I think, 2nd 10th, 2nd 13th, they brought 3 battalions in and filled the gap, and they put a perimeter around the what they call the salient, and that's the furthest the Germans ever got. But we learnt a lot about defensive positions and where you should have posts and the lanes of fire and all that afterwards. But it was too late for Tom and half of our battalion. Losing them distressed us enormously. But we could do nothing at all about it. The 3 weeks my platoon, what was left of it, we'd lost 2 sections. The 23rd Battalion had counter-attacked and stiffened the position for us. And it was the longest 3 weeks of my life. It must have been terrifying for Tom and his mates to see these tanks coming at them, because it was fearsome enough from where we were when they were passing us by just to see them, because we'd never seen tanks before, let alone been opposed to them. We only had infantry weapons with no anti-tank men in there at that time. We had a boy's rifle, shot a .5 round which would bounce off a Bren gun carrier, let alone a tank. And, in the finish, our battalion put up a pretty fair effort. It delayed them for considerable time and gave them time to move the other battalions up to seal the boundary. And although Tom and his mates were taken prisoner, they'd served their purpose. So they gave us a chance to stabilise, and Tobruk was held in consequence of it. But it was terribly bad luck for the battalion that we went up and occupied those posts without any time before we were attacked. And it was a fulsome attack.
So it was obviously when Tom was taken, it was, and the prisoners. How many in numbers are we talking, Tom?
200.
At least 200.
Okay, that would be a huge blow to the battalion. How did the battalion regroup and react to having lost some of their comrades?
Well, morale suffered a little bit for a while, but they took us to a quiet sector of the area, and we drew reinforcements from all other battalions, South Australian, Western Australia, Queenslanders. They came from everywhere, all fine fellows, fit fellows. They'd done pretty well the same training as we had, and they were moulded into the battalion very quickly and very efficiently. We had great officers in the 2nd 24th, and I think that was particularly so with the whole division. And morale built right up again, and even when we started going up the salient again, which we didn't look forward to with any enthusiasm, we went up there and carried on. We used to go out at night and patrol and keep the enemy on his toes. Didn't want to give him any rest if we could help it, and keep him a bit frightened like we were. And altogether we became a battalion again. And when we went on, the experience stood us in good stead down in Egypt at Alamein and Tel El Isa.
Given the training that you had prior and in Palestine and prior to coming over to the Middle East, how prepared would you say you were the days leading up to the battle at the Salient?
Oh, Tom might answer that better.
Well, I think maybe that we were not well trained enough. But I think what is required would have been after that session that we went through. If the military would retrain the men after that experience, it could have made a lot of difference to a later attack of a similar nature.
I'd say that 3 months afterwards, that patrol I was telling you about where we tried to take a box of ammunition up to company headquarters, I'd have successfully got into the post. You can't train men. There's no substitute for experience.
No.
And by the time we went to Alamein, we were a fully experienced battalion. Properly led, properly trained, accustomed to our weapons, and knew exactly we could depend on everybody, and we had very, very high morale. Although by the time we got out to Brook, we were bits of skeletons, scarecrows covered in wog saws and all that sort of thing. But the old spirits were high, and we were very, very pleased to get out, as a matter of fact.
Tommy, can you take me, just describe the treatment from the Jerrys?
The treatment from the frontline German, yes, was excellent. I don't think that you'd find too many POWs who would complain about the frontline treatment. Later on in the desert, the Germans did have their SS and Nazi sympathisers in the desert. Now they're the ones who gave the German troops a bad name. We ran into some of them, yes. They were ran into by our fellows who were in a German POW camp in Benghazi. In Benghazi there were 2 camps. I was in one of them after being recaptured a second time in the desert. I was in the Benghazi camp, but outside Benghazi there was another POW camp, a working German camp. And if you say prisoners of war don't work, they do work. And if you was in the desert where the German had control, the Italians didn't have control of the desert, the Germans did, even though the desert was an Italian colony. Once the Germans got in the desert, it became a German affair. They had no respect whatsoever in the desert of international record or concerns or covering. They completely disregarded Red Cross laws and rules. As the working camp in Benghazi, I know one person living who was in it. I know 2 who was in it. One, you wouldn't want to interview him, he's almost lost his mind now. The other one, yes, he could tell you a lot about it. That particular camp, how the SS had control of that. I myself was in the other one, German working POW camp, which was up in Tripoli, 600-800 miles further up. And I was in that from approximately, dates can only be approximate because we never kept any records whatsoever. We had nothing to keep records with anyway. That would have been sometime July, August, September, October, November, December, when they transported us over to Italy. So I was in this German Tripoli working camp for that time, for 4 or 5 months. And the same German SS and Nazi sympathisers had control of that. The German guys there as well, but there's also the others.
Can I, Tommy, during over those next few months, were you told? Would they let you know anything about what was going on back in Tobruk?
No, they didn't tell us much at all, actually. The only news we sort of got from it was new POWs coming in. They would give us the latest. But we had no access to newspapers, we had no access to wireless, we had no access to anybody except Germans. The Italians, as Mick said earlier, were secondary, and it was a complete German show. So we had no access whatsoever to any news, and the only thing we picked up during that period was another POW coming in, but up in Tripoli we didn't have any more POWs coming in up there, because that was a night working camp, and so far away they didn't transport the POWs up there until later on when they transported them over to Italy. But once we got to Italy now, we did start to get a bit of information there, again from new POWs, but little or nothing from authorities. Later on in the big POW camp, yes, now that was a different thing again. In the big camp at 57, as we knew it, Gropignano, up near the Yugoslavian border by about 60 miles more or less, there was a wireless available. And it was a secret thing. There was very few knew about it, and the fact that very few knew about it, and that's all that did know about it, but the news was taken from the BBC once every 24 hours, and it was written, and there used to be one person who would run around from hut to hut in this camp, and he would read this brief news out to that particular hut. And every hut was treated the same way. Of course you can imagine the security that had to apply to keep that wireless going.
It sounds like even though that you were taken and the POWs, they still took a regimented approach to life. They still were very professional and very disciplined. Is that the way you saw from your fellow POWs?
Our fellows were disciplined.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, they were. Oh, yes, they were quite disciplined, yes, but as I said earlier, they were dejected by the fact that they'd become POWs. It wasn't their fault. It had no reason. They had no reason whatsoever to blame themselves about becoming POWs. It just was not their fault. It was just the circumstances. And as I say, everybody felt dejected the same as I did. I wouldn't have given two bob for myself at that period, but I overcame my difficulties, and I think most of them did overcome their difficulties. As I said, a lot of the men never thought of escaping. A lot of the men also never had the opportunity to do so. I did have the opportunities, I took them, but I was also recaptured. In fact, I was recaptured 3 times, originally, and twice again. And you asked me earlier, what were the Germans like? The front-line German, yes. He's a very good soldier. The fact that he treats you the same. And he will look after you, he will look after your wounds, and he will look after your body, your food. And that's the first thing they did for me on 3 occasions. I also had medical treatment from them, not from war wounds because I was unwounded, but other complaints that come along through desert warfare and one thing another, dysentery, wog sores, and you name it. All sorts of these things come along. But yes, the German troops, they treat you the same as you would want to be treated.
Charlie, what was the lessons learnt from that first attack for to prepare you for your next time in the salient?
Well, efficiency in all things. When we got back there, we went out on patrols 2 or 3 times a week. There'd be patrols go out in front of each battalion. I'm sorry about the hand.
Just start that again. I'll just get you to answer. Probably use my question in the answer.
Well, the thing we learnt was to be efficient and alert in everything, to take control of our area. We'd go out at night and probably go out 1,000 yards. It'd count the steps. It'd step 1,000 yards on the compass bearing and probably lie there for a while and take compass bearings on gun flashes or machine gun flashes. And the other battalion patrols would be doing the same thing. And when all that was taken back and the report went in, they'd co-relate that so that they would know the position of all the guns and machine guns and that out in front of you. And if you ran into a German patrol, which we seldom did because they were a bit frightened of us in that department, we controlled what they call no man's land, where we would have to fight. Sometimes they'd send you out to capture a couple of blokes for interrogation. That was difficult, and then the other times, like I said, just observation, draw fire. Sometimes draw fire to get a compass bearing on it, but that was a bit hairy because then you'd have to get back. But we were all told if we come under heavy fire and the patrol got broken up, the North Star was, you turned your back fully on the North Star and you just took off and you could go straight home on that bearing. The North Star was always directly behind us. And then we learnt that we could make do with half a water bottle of water a day, a packet of biscuits between and a tin of bully beef between 4 blokes a day. That went on for a number of weeks. And how to survive during the daytime in the heat. You lay there doggo in a hole in the ground and come out at night time. All those things, it all added up to discipline. We were very well disciplined. People to say that Australian troops aren't disciplined, but they're terribly well disciplined in battle. They mightn't be very well disciplined in camp. They get a bit rebellious there, but when the chips are down, they all perform to the maximum. And we also learned to keep our weapons very clean. There's a lot of dust and sand about. We'd have to keep them wrapped up and clean them all the time. And generally speaking, the whole thing was improvisation. We had to learn there's dust and flies and fleas and mosquitoes and no food and no water and isolation of it. But we did have a bit of a break in the monotony at night time when the destroyers would bring the food into the harbour about 5 or 6 miles away, and the Germans would come over to bomb them. The ack going up, this was like Henley on the Yarra or Sydney Harbour Bridge on Australia Day. Terrific. And you wouldn't hear a noise for about 5 minutes, and bullets would go up and be firing away for quite a while before the noise would come to us. But it was always our ambition to get in there around the harbour, because they reckoned that the Italians left cigarettes and things in the old dugouts and things there. But we never ever got in there. That was one of life's ambitions. They might still be there for all I know. But in some of the old dugouts there were a few cigars and things. We used them up. And we learnt to study the Woman's Weekly. We had one copy of the Woman's Weekly for the platoon, and we knew every advertisement off by heart. Someone would say 2 words and the bloke would rattle off the whole advertisement, all that sort of nonsense. But it was hard not to get bored, very, very difficult not to get bored. But I was a platoon runner, so I had a little bit of variation. About midnight I'd have to take off from platoon headquarters and go to company headquarters to the situation report and ammunition report and all those sort of things. And I'd get a bit of information down to company headquarters. They seem to be a bit better informed than us. And then also sometimes if you were going out in a wiring party, someone had to stay back in the pit to look after the phone. And you could stick the telephone receiver into the tin hat, and you could pick up Lord Haw Haw broadcasting from Berlin, from the enemy to the enemy through the courtesy of the enemy. And they'd play all these beautiful songs with the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. And that was a great diversion. Without some of those things, it would have been a little bit more difficult to survive, I suppose. But we had great self-reliance, and our mates were wonderful people. Most of them had gone through the Depression, were already toughened up and real tough men, you know. And being just a bit of a boy, I relied on them a lot, and they looked after me too. Seriously looked after me.
Guys, Charlie, you tell me, mate, yeah.
That's it. Just
Tell
tell
me
me.
great fun to Tom.
We'll take a photo of you too. Look at that picture of her. Charlie, can I briefly get you to tell me the story, as if you haven't told me before, of the Woman's Weekly? Hang on a sec.
Sorry, but Tom, just lean a little bit to your left. Yeah, and Charlie, just a bit to your left.
A little bit to your left, other left.
I'll say yeah.
Sorry, boys.
Probably just a touch back.
Actually,
just a touch
Charlie,
to your
just
right.
a touch more to the middle. Sorry, mate. Back, just stop there. And fine.
You're right there. Sorry. It's a bit like being back on the parade yard, isn't it? Eh? The playground.
Yeah.
Can you recap on? You right?
Yep. Go.
You recap on the Women's Weekly story.
One of the problems was in Tobruk. There was no communications. We had nothing to read. No wireless or anything like that. The only reading matter we had was a Woman's Weekly. I think it might have been about 2 or 3 years old when they got hold of it. I don't know where it came from. And we became so familiar with it that we knew it word for word right through, and particularly the advertisements. And it was sort of a game we played. Someone out of Lux Soap, I'd say 2 or 3 words out of a Lux Soap advertisement, and any one of those fellas could have told you the whole advertisement. Or one of those Dorothy Dix stories that say, my husband has been, I'd like to tell you the whole answer to it, that Dorothy Dix and that played a lot of amusement. We'd also play cards. And I had an Italian mate, Joe Battilani from Wonthaggi, a terrific soldier. He'd only been in Australia 7 years. He was a coal miner. And he cleared out from Italy because he didn't like Mussolini. When he took a shot at anyone, he'd say something, an awful expression, Mussolini. And this day we're playing poker, and Joe, and there weren't enough, and I had to deal the discards in, and I caught Joe cheating. He's fiddling the cards, so I pulled him aside after the game, and I said, Joe, that's no good, you can't go cheating. He said, Charlie, don't say anything and you can do it too. So that sort of thing, you know, they're all full of humour. They'd pull anything on you. But the Women's Weekly, without that we'd have been in a bit of a jam. And I don't know what would have happened if we could have got a hold of a new idea or something. That was a lonely place, a lonely, desolate, God-forsaken hole in the ground. In danger nearly all the time, you could hardly move. Especially in the daytime, you couldn't move anywhere. And night time, of course, was full of activity. Yeah.
Can you tell me about that, the day and night, and how the frequency of the patrols and when they were conducted and what happened during the day? About that, the day and night, and how the frequency of the patrols and when they were conducted and what happened during the day?
Well, we patrolled a lot, and I say a lot. All the time I was in the desert and near the enemy, we would patrol. Our officers believed, especially General Moorehead in his directive to the battalion, the company commanders, was to keep his men active and to be in charge of your front, get outside the wire and keep active and keep the enemy on their toes. And that's what he called an active defence. And we experienced it when at the start we got down these Italian cement defences, and if they opened up with artillery, they'd nearly bust your eardrums, and you'd find that you were reluctant to come up from down there and face the enemy and feel secure down there. That's one of the reasons why they got us out of those cement defence situations and dig little holes in the desert, 6 foot long and 3 foot deep and 3 foot wide and all that sort of thing, and sort of try to curb fear. I never saw anybody show fear. I felt it. I was frightened all the time pretty well, but you know, when you've got fellows with you that don't show fear, well, you can hardly display it yourself. And, you lean on each other, and good mates mean everything. And I'm sorry to say that I haven't met many blokes like it since the war that measured up to those characters that I knew in those days, but life's like that. Although I admire the young fellows I see up around the shrine on Anzac Day, they've got wonderful bearing, and I think if any catastrophe overcame Australia, I think the young people would be just the same as what we were. I hear people disparaging them, but I think they'd be just the same as what we were in those times. It's a long time ago. My memory's pretty clear about it. I never enjoyed it that way. One of my mates, some of our fellows went over there to Cyrenaica, to Tobruk and those places on a trip, and one of my mates, he must have thought I was short of money, he was going to shout me a trip over there. He said, would you like to go? I said, well, I was there once and I didn't enjoy it. I don't think I'll bother going again, but thanks just the same. There's nothing I saw there that would interest me in going back there.
Talking about those conditions, what were the dangers on the patrols in no man's land? What did you have to be careful of?
Making a noise. You couldn't make a noise. You were taught to walk like a cat, put your toe on the ground, slide your foot into the position on the ground. Your mates would get terribly crooked on you if you made a noise. No noise at all. You'd probably usually move in a diamond formation. That's the bigger patrols. And if you want to communicate, you'd quietly get up alongside the next bloke and whisper in his ear, and he'd do the same until you passed the message up to the front. But the other patrols that we'd go out to, they were dangerous. They were quite dangerous. And if you came under fire, they put up a flare, you couldn't move. If you're standing up, you just had to stay standing up, because if you moved, you're immediately discernible. The enemy would see you straight away. And you'd be standing there with this big flare up over your head, brightening the night like daytime. And then it'd be always very comfortable when we got back through the wire and we were home again. We'd sleep for the day most of the day if we got back safely. So, but, they were pretty hairy things, patrols.
Yeah, we had no idea what the situation was after we'd surrendered. It wasn't up to us any further. In fact, it wasn't up to us for quite a time before we'd surrendered. As the Major said, we were in a hopeless situation, and he had no idea either, I don't think, as what could have happened to the rest of Tobruk. But fortunately, the second line was there, and the second line at that stage was undamaged. The artillery was undamaged. Our aircraft was practically nil, so you can disregard them at that stage of Tobruk. But the things that saved Tobruk was the artillery and the second line. And after that first day, that 1st of May to 3rd period, that is when the Australian military and the men, like Charlie says, they started to learn what war was all about, their manoeuvres, how they have to work and patrol and that type of thing, and how they took control of the night.
You must remember.
And the Australians did take control of the night. They couldn't control it during the day because of the amount of equipment that the Germans had out there. But the Germans and the Italians did not and could not take control of the night. And that is when the Australian defenders helped to put Tobruk more on the map, because what the Germans didn't know was what the men learnt during those night excursions out in the desert, when they'd go out, okay, we want a couple of prisoners tonight, we want information, so we've got to get prisoners. As Charlie said earlier, that they go out for a prisoner. Yes, they did have to go out for prisoners and bring them in. Only needed a couple, and they'd bring them in and they'd give whatever information they could give, just simple questions, and they'd get a good idea of strength, etc., etc. And the intelligence departments of the army, I think they knew their worth there. And all in all, the hierarchy of the defenders of Tobruk, I mean the brilliant minds there, Moorshead and all the officers and that, I'm sure they learnt a hell of a lot from that big attack on the 1st, 3rd of May. Also the big attack that the Jerrys put on the El Aladam Road when Edmondson got his VC. And this is what I'm sure was the foundation of what was needed to defend Tobruk to the end.
You must remember that the German army, no German army had ever been stopped. They'd rolled up Austria, Poland, Czechoslovakia, France, Belgium, and they came over to North Africa, and they ran into a half-trained battalion, and they stopped them in their tracks. And it drew acclaim from Churchill, who sent us messages, and all the other great leaders. And of course that helped us lift our spirits too, that we had accomplished something. And it sort of gave everybody else in the armies fronting Hitler a bit of hope, because that was during the darkest days of the Second World War. England had a back to the wall and France was destroyed. And here's a mob of Australians that stopped the Africa Corps. And I tell you, nothing so fearsome when you've never seen a tank and never hardly knew anything about it comes rolling towards you. Of course, we were lucky we could see them from the sidelines, but they come straight at Tom. And I don't know how they stood up to it as long as they did, but down when B Company attacked them, some of the fellows got in there with sticky bombs, things called sticky bombs, about as big as a soccer ball. You pull a pin out and it drops away, and this thing's sitting there with stick like honey all over it. They'd stick it on the side of the track and blow a hole in to blow the tracks off. Well, that sort of took a lot of courage, didn't it?
Yes, you're right, I did.
I never ever did it, but I was a bit frightened someone had asked me to do it. But I was very proud of being a member of the 2nd 24th Battalion and very proud of being a rat at Tobruk. If I mention it to my wife, she says, yes, you are a rat, you're probably the biggest rat there. They say those things with tongue in cheek, I'm sure.
I think you might remember that when the Japanese came into the war, Australia's Premier, Prime Minister, you would say, Curtin, he wanted the Australian 9th Division back in Australia. And Churchill, the leader of the English, he did his damnedest to keep the Australian 9th Division over in the Middle East. He wanted them over there. However, the Australian Prime Minister Curtin, he won the day and they returned to Australia. Not only did Curtin want Australia's 9th Division back because they proved themselves in Tobruk. Churchill wanted them over there because of the second front coming on. And Rommel, what did he say? If he had the 9th Division, something about conquering the world or some great
yes, he had a bit of
accolade anyway, whatever it was now. It wasn't conquering the world, but he'd want a division like Australia's 9th Division.
Had a bit of a problem afterwards when they had the New Zealanders and the Black Watch too.
Yeah.
To contend with.
Oh, it's a very proud division, really, because as you probably already know that the Australian 9th Division of that war is the most outstanding division that Australia had during the Second World War, and also that the events of Tobruk, by 14,000 more or less men, was equal to the achievements of Gallipoli. And I think it lasted a similar time. No,
this is what's called esprit de corps, isn't it?
Yeah. So between the two of them, they're on a par with the achievements of which each one did. It's up to everybody to take their pick whether they're in favour of Gallipoli being number one or Siege of Tobruk being number one. But also don't take it away from all other troops. I don't doubt for a moment that wherever you sent Australian troops, they would have done and equalled what Gallipoli did, what Tobruk did, what they did up in the islands. What's the name of that place? Aishishushe, some funny name, up in New Guinea. A funny name of a place up there where the 39th were retreating, and they wiped out how many Japanese during their retreat?
Kokoda Trail, you're talking.
On the Kokoda Trail,
yes,
yeah.
I know the place.
Yeah.
Can I, sorry, I don't want to stop you because you're on something that's very important.
Charlie, just move in a little bit.
Sorry.
Yeah, you probably don't need to say it now, but can you just say, because what you're saying there is fantastic, so can you start that again for us, just shortened version?
Oh dear.
About the troops. You don't need to say every name. You could even say Gallipoli and Tobruk and the rest of the war. You know, what you're saying about the Australian troops, that you had no doubt. Can you say that again?
Yes, well, as far as the Australian troops are concerned, you can compare the Australians in Gallipoli with the troops of the siege of Tobruk and the troops who defended the Kokoda Trail, the 39th Battalion there. And in the future I would also think and say that if ever these situations arose again, you would still find that the Australian troops would be there to equal whatever has gone before, like Tobruk, Gallipoli and Kokoda Trail.
Well, that's a big rap, Tom.
Well, they've proved themselves.
You missed
That's not only me saying so. The
You
proof
missed
is
Alamein.
already there.
You missed
Oh,
Alamein.
I'm sorry, Alamein, of course.
You did.
The Australian 9th Division again, as I might say, had the accolades of, and our battalion on this instance, where the Australian 2nd 24th, they captured the German intelligence unit, Unit 121 was it not, at Tel El Isa. Now this threw the whole of the German war effort into chaos over in the Middle East. They didn't know where they were completely lost without the communications that they had. And it's one of the big things that, one of the big reasons how Germany lost their desert campaign.
The Germans had a spy in Shepherd's Hotel where all the officers used to spend their leave, the whole 8th Army officers. And when they issued the orders for the day to the British Army, this bloke would get hold of them. The British would relay them to the embassy in America, and this German bloke would get hold of them first, and he'd send them to Rommel in the desert. And the British generals were getting the blame for disaster after disaster with their tank warfare, and of course Rommel had their battle plans before the British even got them. But after we captured this unit at El Alamein, it was reversed. It was reversed, and his whole espionage system or spying system fell into chaos, and it put our blokes back on an even playing field, of course, and well, we survived better. But it's all in war. There's a lot of things that depend. It's not only valour and courage and all that sort of thing. A lot of it's necessary if you know a little bit about what the enemy's going to do before he gets the jump. You've got a head start, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right, and and obviously we can't go on to that. I'd love to hear it, but I've got to,
Yeah.
But can you tell me the story about when the Germans fed you the tuna? Can you start that one?
The tuna? Yes, well sorry.
Sorry, just start again. Hang on a sec, start again. Just once you settle, we'll just settle you down a bit. Sorry, General, I don't mean to. Deep breath, Tommy. Tell me about the tuna story.
Will I start off from getting onto the tanks starting off the column, or just arriving at Fort Acroma?
Okay, you're arriving at the camp there.
Well, this column of POWs, over 200, approximately 240 of us, we'd marched about the 8 miles out to Fort Acroma with the German guards and the German 85 Tiger behind us. And we'd been there for some hours when the Germans decided we must be hungry. Well, I couldn't tell you when we'd eaten last, really, because of all the activity overnight and the early morning. But anyway, they were quite right in their wisdom. We were hungry, and they decided to do something about it. And to feed us, we had no eating utensils, we had no food, nothing with us, only what we barely stood up in. So they brought out of their warehouse, wherever was the stores, a tin of tuna. Now, it must have been that round, and it must have been that high, and I would say it would be a 15-20 kilo tin of tuna enormous. I've never seen a tin of fish as big. So they put it there in front of us, and there's 200 of us, or over 200 of us, to have something to eat. So we looked at it and we said, well, how are we going to open this? We didn't even have a pocket knife between us. So the Germans, in their wisdom, they opened it up with the German bayonet. So, okay, so we've got it open. Now what are we going to do? We've got nothing to eat it with. So some of our own NCOs started to take control of things a little bit. And they said, okay, boys, line up, single file. And as you walk past that tin of tuna, you take a handful each. Everybody filed past and they took a handful each of tuna. How much they got, I don't know, but it was only a handful. And it wouldn't have been a three-course meal, certainly, but it would have filled that little bit of very empty space up for a time anyway. I don't recall, but I presume there would have been water there also. I don't remember that there was, but I presume there was water to drink, because water in the desert is a very, very scarce item.
Tom, looking back now after all these years, what would you say got you through your time in the POW camps?
I think my outlook, really. Well, I thought that I'd done everything possible for what I joined up for. And initially when I joined up for Australia's defence and king and country. It was my sole purpose. Plus there's an excitement to be had somewhere. And I was starting to get long in the tooth. I was 26 years of age. I think, Thomas, you'd better do something about this, get some excitement in your life. But that's sort of really why I did enlist. But I think I really served my country to the best of my ability at that time. And I don't think the military had any complaints. They never told me if they did. And I don't think they've ever had any complaints since. I did try to rectify the situation on 2 occasions. On one occasion, another mate and I, he's got a photo in that book there also, he and I escaped from a prison camp in the desert, a Derna prison camp, and he and I were out in the desert there for 10 days, and we left that prison camp with 2 Italian water bottles and a little piece of chocolate about that big, 2 Italian bread rolls, about 200 grams each. They're only a bun really, one of those each, and a tin of sardines. Now that was our 10-day supply. And under those circumstances, I think trying to defend Tobruk the way we did and what we were able to do, and trying to make an escape in the desert for 10 days out there. If you'd ever been in that Libyan desert, you'd have some idea of what it really meant. And at the end of 10 days, we were right behind the German front line. Unfortunately, it wasn't to be, and the German patrol happened to see us before we saw them. Come, come, they said, so we come, come. And they put us back into the camp we'd left. And again, later on in Italy, another escape in Italy. But in the desert, wasn't destined for me to be back in Tobruk to give any help there. But later on in Italy, I tried to do the right thing again. I escaped in Italy. I was on the loose in Italy for 3 months after the Italian armistice in the September of '43. And 2 other mates and I, we walked for a period of day after day for 3 months. From a place approximately 60 miles from the Swiss border, near the city of Vercelli, would identify the area, but the place itself was a village called Olshenango, but the farm I was on was named Palestro. but it's all in that vicinity of the Shelley. The Allies had landed in the southern part of Italy a few days before. That's when the Italian armistice came. We were liberated from this working camp. The war was over, they'd capitulated. So we, in our wisdom, to make the story a bit short, instead of going to Switzerland, which we did, we turned round and went south, down to where the action was. 3 months on the track. We got down to where the action was, at a place called Castel di Sangro on the Sangro River. It's it's in the Apennines, mid-Italy, and it's about 30 miles would have been east of where the big battle was at Castel Monte Cassino, which the monastery which was wiped out by the Americans because it was a popular OP post for the Germans. 20-30 miles east of there is as far as we got. We got within spitting distance of our own front line. We were recaptured. That put another 16 months onto the war for us. From there, about a fortnight later, we were in Munich, where I spent the last 16 months of the war. It was in a big POW camp up at a place called Moosburg, north of Munich, only for a matter of weeks to get re-outfitted, because what we stood in were, at this stage, we had no uniform left, they'd all worn out. A new pair of boots at the start had worn out. There was more water going out as it came in. We were in very poor condition, 3 months on the track. And to be so close to your own front line. And to finish up for a third time. So we got to Germany. I said, well, that's it, I'm not going to try and escape again. And as time went on, although we were in this big Moosburg Stalag 7A prison camp, I don't know how many people that camp held. I'd heard various figures up to about 100,000 people. I'd heard down as low as 20,000. I don't know which is correct. It's such an enormous place. We were only in it for 6 weeks till the Germans outfitted us. Having outfitted us with a bit of British clothing, which they have, and they've got off everybody else who was in the country. People died and all that sort of thing. They didn't waste a thing. And every POW, not only POW, every civilian, internee, overrun country, people, Russians, you name it. Germany was represented by every country in the world. And every one of those people, everybody worked in Germany. It didn't matter a damn who you were. POWs worked also, including me. And we worked there in Munich for the next 16 months. We were in a camp, we were in 2 camps there. And we bombed out of both of them. Air raids were a popular thing. And I suppose I sat out as many air raids as what Charlie did in the Tobruk and El Alamein.
Probably bigger ones, Tom.
Yes, and we don't know how many planes in them, but the rumours we heard there was 250, there was 1,250. You can name your own number between 250 and 1,250. That's what they claimed on one of the biggest raids of Munich. And after those raids were over, the city was a complete bloody shambles. And I will say it was a bloody shame to see such a beautiful city destroyed. The way Munich was. However, that was war, and the Brits and the Americans were only getting even on what the destructions that the German Luftwaffe had done to England, and they were repaying the debt, and that's what it was. But they killed a lot of POWs in the process also. But everybody worked in Germany. We worked, and I had automatic pointed at me one day, you unload our ship or you do not unload our ship. And there's guys there with automatics ready, already cocked. We heard the cocking of them. And this German officer, he wanted us to unload ships up in Tripoli, actually. As I said, might have said earlier, where the Red Cross had no recognition over there. They didn't recognise it, and there's no representatives over there in Libya. And we're down to the pier this day. This is where the SS and the Nazis came into it. They did operate in the desert, yes, as well as they did over in their own country. On this particular day, this German supply ship had come in, and we were in this camp. We used to go out working every day at here, there or somewhere else. On this day it was down to the pier because the ship was in. We discovered we were going to unload ammunition, etc. We objected to unloading ammunition. We're not supposed to under Geneva Conventions. Anyway, this got back to the German officers. It went through the guards first, and the German officer, he came along, and we told him what the problem was. He says, we must have our ship unloaded. He said, you people have to do it. He spoke good English, a lot of them did. So on this occasion, he's standing on a bit of a raised spot there, and about 20 of us lined up around him like this. There's a couple of troops here and a couple of troops over there, guards, with automatics slung over the shoulders. He said something to those guards, and we heard the cocking of the weapons. He turned to us. He said, you unload our ships or you do not unload our ships. We got the message. We said, yes, we unload your ships. So we did. Either that or he had 20 dead people on his...
Charlie, would you be curious to tell me, or describe for me, your most enduring moment in Tobruk?
Well, nothing really stands out thinking about it, Monty.
Sorry, I'll just start again. Just me,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, that again.
Sorry,
Yeah.
guys.
You're bloody unfaithful to me, Tom.
Yeah, exactly. He's doing a runner from you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Forget about it occasionally.
I've got no outstanding recollections of it. It's the enormity of the thing the whole time. But it's the quality of the mates I had there. It's one of my most enduring memories. You could 100% reliable, all good fellas. They maintained good spirits the whole way through. And the monotony and the terrible conditions of it, that is the only cushion we had against it, mateship. And to think that we had to leave a good few of them behind there fills me with sadness. I often think about them. But then when the time came to leave, they took us down to the seashore and the ship came in, and we were all so eager and keen to move on to the ship. And the air raid siren went and they said, you must leave, and they turned us round and marched us inland, and it broke our hearts. We had to wait another 3 nights, I think it was 2 or 3 nights before we could go back on the ship. But I remember it distinctly. And then on the ship we had a disaster, 14 fellas got washed overboard. But, what amazed me was there were fellas diving in all over the ship to save them, and it was enormous seas running it. They call it the pond of the Mediterranean, Mussolini's pond or something they called it. Well, the seas that were running when the boys went overboard were as big as anything I saw in the Great Australian Bight. These fellas just dived overboard, swam into. Someone said, are you going? I said, oh, if you back it, you'll have to pull me out. But it was an amazing sight to see these chaps, how they dived in without any consideration at all, pulled them out. But, oh no, I'm quite quite proud of the fact that I was there.
Can I just cover off, because I'll come back on that. You mentioned the story, or started the story, that's something I wanted to ask you about a little bit later, but now we're on to it. Can you just set that up for me? Obviously I've got to shorten it down. I don't want to...
On the ship?
Just tell me about the ship that you're on and what happened and where you were at the time, and just take it from there, Ken.
Well, we're on this destroyer called the Nizam, and she was a very modern design, very, very thin hull, and very fast. And the three ships were doing zigzag course because we were dodging submarines, or submarines operating in that area, and also we were within Stuka range from the El Adam aerodrome. And this ship of ours got in the wash of the ship in front of her and almost capsized and washed all these fellas off. And the chap in charge of the convoy telegraphed our blokes, under no circumstances stop, and she'll endanger your ship. And our bloke signalled back, kangaroos in the water, and he turned straight around and pulled back to where those chaps were in the water. So we lost a few of them. I think we lost 3 or 4 chaps. And the ship's cook was reported missing, but I had the pleasure of meeting him in the Heidelberg Military Hospital afterwards. He said, I believe I've been reported drowned in the Mediterranean. I said, yes, of course, the ship's cook. He said, it wasn't me. I said, I'm still here. But, I was lying, I get seasick pretty easily. Even looking at the sea, I always get seasick. And I was lying under a ventilator near the side of the ship, and the chap came along and he'd been eating beans, tin of beans he'd eaten, and he lost them all right beside me. Well, that made me feel very sick. And there's nothing along the side of a destroyer you can lean on. It's just a rope running along the side. And I went through the gun emplacement to the other side to be sick over there, and it was just when it tilted and I got thrown back into the gun pit, and I hit the shield around the side of the gun pit, and that's where I finished up until the ship straightened up again. It was a very, very providential tin of beans that lobbed in beside me on the deck of the Nizam. But I did read after the war where 13 midshipmen got washed off the coast of Australia somewhere and luckily saved. But she was a very fragile ship.
When we're talking about people who are jumping in to save, I just want to go over that again, because basically, was it sailors or soldiers? I mean, soldiers went in the water. I think there was one Navy person, but whether or not
they were all the sailors. They were all sleeping along the top of the deck. So the destroyer's not a very big ship, and they had a whole battalion of us on board, or more than that, you know. It was an eventful trip. Many of the ships had been sunk. Without those destroyers, we'd have never stayed in Tobruk, because they were our only line of supply. They bought all our ammunition, all our food. A few of them got sunk in the harbour. The old harbour looked like a junkyard with ships sunk everywhere in it. But those sailors, they really knew what they were doing. I don't know what the young blokes of today would be like if they...
Personal attack there, wasn't it? When you were thrown back in the gun pit, and the ship broached to, I'll give you a Navy term there.
Yes, well, I was half asleep lying beside the ventilator on the deck of the Nizam, the ship, and a chap came along. The ship's staff had been very good to us. They filled us up with food as soon as we came aboard. This fellow apparently, beans and tomato sauce was too rich for him, and he lost them beside me. I was a bit squeamish in the stomach anyway, and instead of getting up to be sick near where I was, I climbed through the gun emplacement in the middle of the ship and went towards the other side of the ship. And when she tilted, I got thrown back into the gun pit. And I was quite safe and secure there while the fellows were thrown in. And all the other fellows along where I was, they were thrown into the water. I think we lost 3 or 4 drowned, and the ship's cook was reported missing. But I met him years later, many, many years later, in the Heidelberg Military Hospital. And he assured me that he was the cook in question, but he didn't get drowned. And I was very pleased to hear about that.
Once they hit the water, what happened then?
Well, the chaps dived off the ship all over the place and went in to save them, and the terrific sea was running. It was, I never saw seas in the Great Australian Bight to equal them. It's supposed to be a pond, a mill pond, a Mediterranean, but this day there was no mill pond about it. And thanks to their mates, a lot of them were rescued. Someone said, "Are you going?" And I said, "You'd have to rescue me in there if I dive in." And that's how serious the, because I could swim fairly good, but not good enough to get into that and save anybody. And I thought it was quite a feat after 7.5 months into Brook without having a swim to do that was quite an achievement. And that's one of my most outstanding recollections of that war, actually.
Tell me now, guys, I'm just going to go into the values, and then we're on the home run now. I'm pushing into your time, but tell me the words like professionalism.
I beg your pardon?
Words like, I'm going to go through the defence values, right?
Defence values.
Our Defence Force values today are professionalism, loyalty, innovation, courage, integrity and teamwork. Now when you hear the words like professionalism, how do you relate that back to the men that fought in Tobruk?
Oh, on a scale of 10, I'd say about 6. That's 6. Innovation and determination, those sort of things came into it. I think by the time the battalion went to New Guinea, I think it became a very professional, building on what had happened to us previously. It became a very professional battalion. But in those days, especially after we'd get knocked on 1st of May and they captured a big segment of the battalion, we had suffered heavy casualties. It took us a long time to reorganise and reform. But it didn't stop us operating as infantry soldiers in the capacity of, there was still enough of the seasoned fellas to go out on patrols and more or less support the newcomers that hadn't had the experience. Experienced men are invaluable in a fighting battalion, in a fighting unit. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I think you're quite right, really, Charles. I think it's quite right that professionalism, yes, that there's all those categories you mentioned. I think they all come into it, but where they come in on that same list could be questionable.
Sure.
Professionalism, comradeship, bravery, etc., etc.
So just on that, I might throw one at you then, because don't worry about all of them. I'll just tell you one: loyalty. What can you say about loyalty?
I got one mate left. He was the first person I met when I joined the army back in June of 1940. He's still my mate today. I think that's loyal. Yes, I think that's very loyal. For 60 odd years, he's still living, but he's over in England nowadays. And we've been mates since it would have been early July 1940, and this is 2003. So that's 63 years we've been mates, and we've been equally as loyal to each other as we were back then, and through every day of those 63 years. And yes, and I have other mates also. Freddie died 30 years ago. He's a very loyal little fella. He's another 16-year-old one when he enlisted, and I sort of took him under my wing because there's 10 years difference in our age. He was 16 and I was 26 at that time. And he was a smart little lad, and in fact he left Christian Brothers College up in Albury to enlist. And we knew each other until the day he died. And yes, and either of those men and a third once Noe Drew. He's a second 17th man, Queensland fella.
What would you say, Charlie, on you mentioned, you know, innovation was a value that was endured into Tobruk. What can you say about innovation? How was that sort of?
Well, they always say that the best weapon you can have is a captured one, and we had an old heavy Italian machine gun. I couldn't get it to work. Had it even to the workshops, so nobody could operate it. And one of the fellows there got a brilliant idea. He got some margarine from somewhere, and he melted that. He added some additives. I won't mention what they were. That's one a remarkable one. And finally, the solution that he got the machine gun working. It became very valuable to us in the defence of the post where we were. That's my idea of what innovation is. It's also like keeping a weapon clean and keeping the dust out when you've got no spare material and all that sort of thing. Very difficult. But we always found out, we always find a way around it. There's no problem that you can't solve if you have a go at it. And it's a very worthwhile attribute to be innovative.
Did you ever, in your time in Tobruk, I mean, this silly question to start off, you would have witnessed a lot of acts of courage. Is there one there that we haven't covered off today, where you witnessed that act that you thought was a courageous act that you observed firsthand?
What, just at Tobruk or anywhere?
Just in Tobruk, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Just if you can. Courage as you two both cuddling each other. Is there anything that, I mean, what you said already covers it off, so all I'm doing is trying to... Is there anything in what to you where you thought there was a courageous act where you...
I had never thought about it because there's so much of that sort of thing. It was just part of our occupation. You take risks and do these things. But anyone to walk into machine gun fire, it's an enormous thing to do. And I think the only thing that saves you in those situations is experience, because you learn where the bullets are. If they're going over your head, there's some inexperienced soldiers don't lower their sights as the advancing troops come towards them, and it saved us dozens and dozens of times. You learn the bullets cracking over the top of your head. They're going above your head, so you're quite secure. It's when they whistle very close to your ear, you're in danger, very great danger, and you learn instinctively to go to ground to get away from it. And there's no lack of courage for you to go to ground if you're threatened with. But they say a dead soldier's got no value. That's quite true. Live soldiers have everything.
What about teamwork? How would you say teamwork was conducted throughout Tobruk?
Wonderfully well.
It had to be teamwork, yes.
Yeah, wonderfully well.
Yes.
Sometimes by the officers or the NCOs, or sometimes just by the ordinary fellows. You know, we were a team. I said something about teamwork. They were always a team. Great teams too, especially under the circumstances. But your life depended on each other, so it sort of becomes second nature. What do you reckon?
Yes, I quite agree that if you didn't have a teamwork, your discipline is not all that valuable to you. You've got to have discipline, you've got to have teamwork to achieve what you want to do.
Not only in your immediate area, you've got to have teamwork with the people behind you too. You've got to be able to rely on everybody.
If you're out on a patrol at night, and if you haven't got teamwork, well then you haven't got a patrol.
No.
You got everything else going on, you're making all the noise around the place and you're in enemy territory and you're just asking for trouble if you haven't got the teamwork to follow the spirit of the team and the discipline of the team.
Very good answer. Last value that we have that encompasses everything that we've talked about today is integrity. Integrity relates to words like honour, honesty, uprightness. And when you look back on the rats of Tobruk, where does integrity sit?
Oh, that's a good one.
I'd put it nearly at the top of the pile. I'd put it almost at the top of the pile. Although you start to learn that as kids at school, don't you?
You want to elaborate on it for us, Tom? I know you're thinking about it there. Tell me.
Yeah, it's a pretty stiff one, isn't it?
Yes, it is a bit of a tough one, but you got the integrity of the whole situation. It's not only me or you, it's the whole situation. You've got to encompass the whole lot of it. And the whole thing has to work together, the integrity of the whole team.
Although I
to
had one
achieve-
experience where it didn't work. I was sent away as platoon runner one night. We were digging a secret position about 300 yards away from the Germans. We had to put up a barbed wire fence between us too, which was a pretty hairy expedition. When I came back, an old mate of mine, he was using my pick. And I said to him, Jack, I want my pick now. He said, it's not your pick, Scales. I said, it is my pick. And he come up out of the hole and he threw the pick on the ground and he said, Scales, your attitude is arrogant. So I thought, you can keep the pick, Jack. Must have been his pick. I must have made a mistake.
Tell me, I covered off on your experience leaving Tobruk. Tom, your time, because obviously going away and you went to various camps and we talked about your the escapes that you made. Tell me how you actually came to an end, your time in the POW camps and you were freed.
How it came? During the 16 months I was in Munich, the capital of Austria, and there'd been a lot of heavy bombing over the last 6 or 8 months of that period. But the last 6 weeks, we hardly heard an all clear on the system, on the alarm system. It was a continuous air raid. What was the question again? I lost myself a moment.
Tell me, did you finish up feeling a bit sorry for the German citizens?
Yes, I'm with you now. But during all that time, we were mixing with the German people, but the Nazi and the SS, we used to see a lot of them also. And we had our own guards in the camp. Generally, we were treated quite well by the civilians. And at the end of the war, there'd been, the air raiders stopped, sort of, but no more clear on the sirens. The war was still going on. There's no aircraft overhead. We don't know what to expect. Things are going quiet and have gone quiet. Then we started air artillery. We didn't believe it for a while. We didn't think it was artillery, but it was artillery. We knew the war wasn't far away, that they were advancing from the west to the east, the Allies. And there was only a few shots, half a dozen maybe. We didn't see any German troops, and we were on the western side of Munich where our camp was. That's the one that had been bombed and flattened and rebuilt. And then suddenly an American Jeep pulls up. But now what wasn't a closed gate but an open gate, because the German guys have all suddenly gone, only an hour ago. And this American Jeep, it's full of 4 people, officer. They knew where our camp was, because they knew where all the camps, all POW camps were. But that didn't stop us from being flattened either in the bombing raid. Anyway, this what's name stopped, and we had a jock, a big Scotsman in charge, a WO. And they spoke to him and everybody else, and we'll get a few supplies around to you here very quickly, and we'll look after you, and they did. They had supplies came around and fed us. In fact, we had that much food. The civilians started to come over to the camp, which all around you, right in the suburbs where our camp was, and we were given some of this food to them, to feed them, because they were in such a poor, they were bloody sight worse off than we were. And we started to feed them. We suddenly realised the war was over. And it was. Anyway, the Americans, they gave us food and dropped food off to supply us for a few days. And they were regular visitors then for the next 3 or 4 days. And in the meantime, of course, they said, I will organise transport for you and aircraft for you, which they did. Oh, this was our big moment. The day came when they sent in trucks and loaded us into these trucks, and they took us out to the airport, a few miles out. They loaded us onto these DC-3s, transport aircraft. They put us onto these. It's really on, we're free. And they did, they flew us from there. The pilot, he flew down to Switzerland first, landed just inside the place called Bregan. We were only there for half an hour. What he stopped for, therefore I wouldn't have a clue. But we simply got out of the plane and stayed there, just walked around. He was back, okay, all aboard, so we all get back on board. He flew from there, he flew right across Switzerland into Belgium and across the Maginot Line and the Siegfried Line, where they both opposed each other. We could see them, they were disused of course. We landed in Belgium. That would have been in the morning, I think, because we were only there the one night. And this camp they'd already organised, it was already occupied by others. The camp had been going on for weeks from other areas that had been liberated, POs, Allied POWs. And they'd been going through Belgium, this camp at Belgium also. And from there they were being outfitted, and they outfitted us with new English battle dress. And the old stuff we were wearing, well, we dumped that, and that would have all got burnt, full of lice and God knows what not as well. And they showered us, they disinfected us. And if you'd like to go into town for a few hours, okay, but you'll be back by midnight because you're on your way to England tomorrow. So we went into town, we walked in, the pay book was there, so we got some money out of our pay book. We walked into town and met people along the way, and we met the Belgian people, and they were happy to see us. We spoke to them, some of them spoke English. Anyway, we went into town, spent an hour or two in there. We got back before midnight, we camped in this camp they had in bed there. Next day we got up, pack up. We had no gear, of course, or practically nothing anyway. And on buses and trucks again to the airport, big Lancaster bombers. They loaded us into those. Only weeks ago, they'd been dropping bombs all over Munich, all over Germany. And that's what they transported us in from Belgium to an airport just south of London. A welcome committee there. Red Cross was there. And they gave us a great welcome there. From there, we were there for an hour or two. They put us on trains and we all went down to Eastbourne, which was an area on the south coast of England where Australian military had taken over this area of England, but we'd taken over this area of the suburbs, and we were encamped in these beautiful homes down there. And we were there for, I was in England for the next month. But it's only then when we got there that we were really, the war is over. And it was over. Even even when we got back to Australia, we were there for a month in England and another month's trip on the boat. We didn't get back to Australia till the July. But we did. That's when we got to England. Really, we did realise it was all over. One of the happy days of your life.
So you've got a bit of a time constraint now on the tape. So what I'm going to do is got a couple of questions and then we're done. So
60 miles.
yep. So basically, the reason behind this production is to remind Australian Defence Force personnel today about the values and how important they are to uphold, as they were upheld in Tobruk and throughout the war. What advice would you give to defence personnel that serving the country throughout the world today about how important, the importance of these values and the need to maintain them?
Well, I think personally that Australia's a good, strong, young, growing country, and I think we've had these values ever since Australia was first settled. I think it's also been proven from every war that Australia has been connected with or involved in, ever since the Boer War, that they've showed what Australian troops are worth, which is only the front of what the people behind the soldier is worth. Is the population and the country itself that gives the troops the ability and the ability, the wisdom to uphold a strong tradition of our forefathers. I think it's born into us that there's a sense of fair play, and I think the longer we keep the sense of fair play, the longer this country is going to survive. It's even surviving now, even with what's going on overseas at the present time, because of it.
That's right. That's well said. Would you like to hazard a...
What's the question again?
The question is, what advice would you give to Defence Force personnel today on the importance of maintaining the values that were held in the highest regard in Tobruk?
Well, from what I've seen lately of the Defence Force overseas in Iraq, I don't think we could tell them anything. But all those traditional things that Tom spoke about are very important. But when it comes down to tin tacks in the Defence Force, the best trained, the best equipped and the best disciplined battalion will win. As Napoleon said, the strongest battalions will win. If you haven't got a proper system of officer training, selection, and most of our officers were selected in the field, and they were selected on ability, and we had every confidence in them. I've known one platoon in our battalion that had a sergeant in charge for 3 months. When they brought a young officer up to take charge, the troops refused to serve under him. They wanted to continue with their sergeant, and the colonel stepped aside and let them keep the sergeant, and allotted the other lieutenant another platoon. But integrity is everything. You mentioned integrity. Integrity is everything. Honour and integrity.
One of the last questions is, tell me, what does it mean to you both today to be a rat of Tobruk?
I'm glad I am. I have no regrets of having been there. I'm glad I volunteered to defend this country and what we believe in. Not only this country, but other countries that believe in the same things as what Australians believe in. Yes, I'm quite happy to have served in the Australian military. I was only a volunteer. Well, we all were volunteers, and I was quite happy at the time when I just simply told my mother, I was over age and they had no objections there anyway, and my mother wouldn't have objected because she was English herself. And she would have understood. Having had two of her own brothers in the First World War.
With you two, you haven't been working. I mean, you've had separate lives, and your paths didn't cross back in Tobruk.
No.
But today you sit here almost like best mates, and there's a common bond.
Well, I consider
That's right.
I'm privileged to sit here beside Tom.
I feel the same.
What? Tell me about that. What is it? That common bond that you two, after 62 years, you can sit together and talk the way you have today.
I think for a while we were men. We're self-reliant men.
Self-reliant people, yes. And we have a common bond of having served the same purpose of what we both were in the military for. Had it not been military, our fathers may or may not have crossed in some other field. They haven't, but in this case it was through the military.
And when people say to me, where were you during the war? And I say Tobruk and Alamein, I feel very, very proud.
Yes, I'm never ashamed to say I was in Tobruk.
Well, gentlemen, it's been an absolute privilege.